Part 97. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 975. In this world, there is no absolute plan. If you think it is completely omnipotent, it is because you are not high enough. The common people in ancient times simply believed that the emperors were all good, and the bad ones were the ministers around them. Therefore, many rebellions in ancient times liked to use the banner of King Genocide. In fact, if they got to the level of real high-ranking ministers, you may find that the emperor is actually just a person, tall, short, fat and thin, taking elixirs all day long or squeezing his body hard on his concubines. When he first became a listener, Subai felt that the broadcast was absolutely omniscient and omnipotent, but in fact the broadcast made mistakes not once or twice, and as his strength improved and he came into contact with more and more secrets, Subai believed that Alexander and the first emperor worked together. The plan has a high probability of success. Moreover, he had personally erased Su Yuhang's ghost in his memory. Until now, relying on the arrangement left by the old rich man, he was barely able to look at the man and the woman. Su Yuhang and broadcasting were like this, let alone Liqi. Subai definitely didn't believe that Liqi could design the orphanage's formation without any flaws. If she was really that scary, then Su Yuhang and Lu Menjia wouldn't have done it before. There may be a chance to successfully defect to the broadcast with the Terracotta Warriors and the Macedonian Palace respectively. Liqi should have been able to stop them at that time, but she failed, so she could only continue to take the train to that world in despair. Walking to the door of the orphanage, Subai put the armor aside. Jixiang and Ruyi stood behind Subai, seeming to be curious about what Subai was going to do. Inside, Ruyi was still as indifferent as ever, while Jixiang's eyes flashed with a glimmer of hope. Subai didn't know whether he could succeed, because his conjecture only involved a theoretical possibility. If he put it into action, what changes would happen, except for Liqi? No, maybe even Liqi himself couldn't guess. However, this is the most likely method to succeed now, apart from achieving enlightenment yourself. I want to save him, but I don't know if this method will succeed. Subai looked at Jixiang and said, it might fail. Jixiang showed no expression, neither approval nor resistance. This was an extremely difficult decision, and it was left to Subai. In fact, Subai didn't think about it for long, because even if he became enlightened, the probability of successfully rescuing the little guy was only 50%. Besides, what if he was stuck in that realm like Chen Ru and couldn't break the ice? Everything has a contingency. Son, if I accidentally kill you, I will go down and stay with you. This sentence seemed to be said to the little guy, but in fact it was said by Subai to himself. After saying this, Subai took a breath and patted the armor lightly with his palm. Buzz. The armor immediately dispersed and began to restructure with Subai as the center. Subai stretched out his arms, and slowly, each part of the armor began to fit Subai's body, fitting tightly, as if it was really tailor-made. Of course, this should be one of the characteristics of this armor. The armor is not heavy, but it gives people a great sense of security, as if with him covering it outside, nothing will happen to them. This is a kind of spiritual comfort, which can also be said to be a hint. You are so courageous, so big. It seems that because he put on this suit of armor, Subai found that the armored man communicated with himself much more clearly than before. In other words, he and the armored man now actually shared a set of armor. This is a father's love like a mountain. Subai smiled and explained that the helmet was very comfortable to wear and did not feel burdensome or restrictive at all. This surprised Subai and gave him a new level of understanding of the abilities of the formation masters during the Qin dynasty. It was such a glorious and splendid era. Perhaps, they were equivalent to the gods in Greek legends. But that era eventually came to an end under the continuous attacks of broadcasting. If there was any possibility that Fanfan could defeat broadcasting with hard power, Subai believed that Alexander the Great would never abandon the remaining troops to teach broadcasting. The first emperor, there is no way that tens of thousands of his tigers and soldiers will be sacrificed for the sake of the plan. Put on the armor. Subai can feel that the armor seems to be heating up continuously. This temperature does not refer to the specific body temperature, but as if you can feel that it is waking up. The armor, like the sword, should be vertical and horizontal. A product on the battlefield, as a result, its actual use over the past 2,000 years was only to bear the responsibility of sealing. The armor has spirit, so it should be unwilling to give in. You're so brave, you're too brave. The armored man's voice came from time to time, but Subai didn't take it seriously, but prepared to walk towards the orphanage gate in front of him. Are you worthy of wearing this armor? Subai stopped, not because of the armor man, but because the armor on his body suddenly became heavier at this time. The armor that was as light as a feather now seemed to have turned into a high mountain, as if it was trying to suppress him. Ha 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 ha. The armored man's laughter came again, and Subai could be sure that all this was not done by the armored man. If this set of armor is compared to a prison, the man in the armor is actually the prisoner being held in the deepest part, and now he is actually equivalent to half a prisoner. This armor is actively and spontaneously working on himself. Subai's eyes condensed slightly at this moment. Matter. It seems something unexpected happened. Jixiang and Ruyi stared at Subai from the side. When they saw that Subai stopped and did not continue walking towards the orphanage, Jixiang looked around Subai suspiciously, but found that Subai's face began to show sweat, and Subai's face began to show sweat. The ground under Bai's feet also sunk. The ground below is rocky, but the armor is still too heavy. Jixiang soon saw runes flashing out on the armor, and at the same time, waves of tyrannical air swept out with a sense of willfulness and determination. There was no trace of panic on Subai's face. You underestimated this armor, you underestimated Zilong. The armored man's voice was filled with clear schadenfreude. Everyone has the subconscious thought, that is, after I am unlucky, I hope that other people will be unlucky with me, so that I will not feel so uncomfortable. The armored man is a guy who has been sealed and asleep for 2,000 years. His thoughts, to a certain extent, are still very innocent. Subai raised his hand and looked at the armor on his arm. At this time, he looked like a clown wearing a ribbon lampshade. Okay, it's a bit blasphemous to compare a Qin dynasty general's armor to the special costumes of a circus song and dance performance, but when you wear it, it's hard to have any good impressions of it. It won't make you feel cool, nor will it make you feel like you're suddenly full of breasts. It won't give you the courage to be a man. It will make you feel, I'm about to explode. Yes. Subai now felt like he was sitting on a nuclear reactor, and this nuclear reactor was in an extremely violent stage. Bimax. The voice of Lord Buddha came not far away. Lord Buddha put down the things in the plastic bag in his hand and quickly appeared next to Subai. He looked at Subai wearing this armor and his face was a little solemn, as if he was blaming him. Why is Subai so impatient? I want to see if I can wear this armor to pick up my son, Subai said honestly. But now the trouble is a bit big. Lord Fo saw that the energy fluctuations on Subai's body were very abnormal. To be precise, the armor showed a special reaction after being worn by Subai. Is there a cigarette in your pocket? Subai asked. I bought it for you at the county supermarket. Foye was about to turn around and take back the plastic bag, but saw that Jixiang had already bitten the plastic bag very quickly. Subai squatted down, took out a cigarette and opened it, then took out a cigarette and bit it in his mouth, lit it, took a deep breath, and then slowly blew out the smoke ring. It feels like dancing on the grave, haha. Subai was still laughing. You are very strong physically, but isn't that Qin Bing's body more terrifying than yours? Even his strength, which is not inferior to that of the big brother, can only be sealed by this armor. How can you still? Subai made a stop and interrupted Buddha's words. Let me be quiet, let me explode quietly. The word explosion hasn't been finished yet. Boom. Subai really exploded. Subai inside the armor instantly turned into a ball of blood, and the helmet position of the armor released a red light. However, the red light was a bit weak and failed to go straight into the sky. It completely dissipated in mid-air. Jixiang and Ruyi were both startled, and the two cats' tails immediately turned up. Buddha is also a little unbelievable. Subai. Just die like that? Buddha picked up the armor. The blood inside had evaporated completely, and the entire armor looked extremely clean. Damn, this thing is also a backup device, a BB camera. Subai's voice suddenly sounded behind Buddha. Buddha turned around suddenly and saw Subai standing behind him intact. Jixiang, Ruyi and the two cats were frightened again. Hey, this armor is worn by my clone. Because the armor is isolated, you can't tell that it's my clone. Subai opened his palm again, and a phalange appeared inside. Do you remember this bone? Chen, you help me open it. It can isolate the breath, so you didn't sense my presence, just to be on the safe side and deceive this armor. After saying that, Subai took the armor from Buddha and asked, did you see that red light? If it is not my clone but the real me, the power generated by the collapse of my life should be enough for that. A red light rushed up to the sky, even reached that world. Then, wake up the evil stars sleeping in the coffin. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 976. Buddha suddenly felt that things had changed too quickly. How did you change? Buddha wanted to say why you have started to use your brain, but when you think about it, this is really inappropriate. Although Dabai seems to only do things in his heart for temporary pleasure, Subai is not stupid, as long as he does not get sick. Subai ignored Buddha, but took the armor and continued, the armored man sealed inside is one of the 500 evil stars. His strength is definitely much higher than ours, and even more powerful than ordinary big shot listeners. But he was just sealed inside and was not used like my clone just now. After hearing this, Lord Buddha answered, you mean, the transmission of the signal can only be completed by the way of self-sacrifice and sacrifice by the listener wearing it? In order to wake up the sleeping guys in that world. There is another premise. The audience's strength must not be inferior. Subai frowned slightly and speculated, at least, the strength must not be lower than mine to ensure a 100% success rate. You are now at the peak of the intermediate level of advanced listeners. Does that mean you have to get a high-level listener to sacrifice you? Buddha smiled, not to mention how difficult it is. Simply, even the radio cannot look at us. He attacked that target like this. So this thing can only be used as a bottom-line thing for the time being. Let's see in the future. I think the first emperor should have left other ways to wake up the thing sleeping in the coffin. If it doesn't work in the end, the four of us can, even at the risk of being punished by the broadcast. He had to surround and control a high-level listener and a high-level powerhouse before letting him wear this armor. Remember Liqi? Remember Su Yuhang? Broadcasting is a very reasonable existence, but if your strength and fists reach a certain level, or your role reaches a certain level, broadcasting will choose a relatively relaxed way to treat us. Once the 500 evil stars wake up in that world, it is impossible for the radio to strangle all four of us at that time. Otherwise, who else can it find to help it continue to fight? Let's discuss it after the monk and the fat man come back. Lord Fo nodded. Indeed, the choice Subai just mentioned can only be said to be the last option. Of course, the premise is that the four of them must have enough skills. At the very least, at least 3 of the 4 people must advance to the advanced audience level to be able to confidently suppress and subdue a strong person of the same level. It is meaningless to just defeat or let the opponent escape. Are you going to start retreating? Let's postpone it for one night. I'm a little confused today, Buddha said with a wry smile. I am promoted based on merit and Buddhist charm, and the requirements for my mental state will be higher. In fact, it is also another kind of inheritance of cause and effect. Subai knew that it might be the experiment he had just done that made Buddha's mind fluctuate a little. At that moment, he just patted Buddha's shoulder lightly and said, "Well, I'll go out and buy something first." The same goes for you. In addition to rice and noodles, you can buy everything in the temple with so much wine, it's a bit difficult to get anything else. Young Master Su is a person who never tires of food and fine food. In the world of the story, there is nothing you can do about it, but in the real world, if you can be particular about it, just be particular about it. To put it bluntly, for the audience, even a meal is fine. Treat it like a deprivation meal. Are you going to Chengdu? Buddha asked. Actually, you can take a turn to Meishan and have a look. No, I'm not interested in Chiren and Zhangxianzhong, and the clone I just arranged has also consumed some of my energy. I just need to go to Chengdu to find some ways to make up for it. I'm close to the next breakthrough, and it's time to make adjustments. It's a state of mind. Repair it. Lord Buddha glanced at Subai in surprise, without saying anything, and took the initiative to give Subai the car key. Subai glanced at the orphanage, then at Ji Xiangruyi, who was still at the door of the orphanage, turned around, walked down the mountain and got into the car. Sitting in the car, Subai lit a cigarette first, then took out his phone and took a look. There was an unknown friend on his phone. He was added by the other party last night. This was definitely not a random addition by a shaker or someone nearby. Yes, because the other party's additional message is, Subai. Obviously, this guy knows him, and he is probably an audience member at the same level as himself, and the other party wants to see him. Subai wasn't worried about any danger. Although he didn't know how many boss-level listeners appeared in the world, it was obvious that boss-level listeners wouldn't take action against him. If he was a high-level listener, he would want to do something to him. It is not that difficult to pose a threat. Even if a high-level strong man appears, he will not be afraid of him. As for why he didn't tell Lord Buddha about this, it was because everyone has their own secrets, especially just now. Subai saw that Lord Buddha had actually driven to the foot of the mountain long ago, but he had been standing in the distance observing his appearance after putting on the armor. In this movement, Buddha also had the intention of letting himself, who was always bold and impulsive, explore the path. It was not until the end, when it seemed that the ship was dead, that Buddha appeared and showed his anxiety appropriately. It was also because he had those phalanges that even a big boss would find it difficult to detect his own aura when he moved his phalanges. Therefore, Foy had no idea that his thoughts and actions would fall into his eyes. Virtual reality, real reality, virtual reality, some friendships are indeed important, but they are not that important, especially in this big environment. Everyone is under great pressure. Subai threw the cigarette butt out of the window, started the car and drove out of the small road in the middle of the mountain col and onto the highway. The other party didn't say a word to him, but just sent him a location to share. The location was in Wuhao International Garden, Wuhao District, Chengdu. Subai was familiar with that location because it was where Lizzie once lived. It was his first time. When you see Lychee, you will send good luck there. Driving from here, it would normally take 1.5 hours to reach Chengdu, but under Subai's control, 40 minutes was just about the same. However, just as Subai turned the steering wheel with one hand and stepped on the accelerator to move forward quickly, the road ahead suddenly, two cars collided with each other, blocking the road. Subai had no choice but to step on the brakes. Just when Subai was wondering whether he should get out of the car and move the car over or directly run to Chengdu under his own power and wait for a car when he came back, a man got out of the black Audi car on the opposite side. There was a pool of blood on the man. The man rushed directly to Subai's car, opened Sudbai's door and got into the passenger seat. The cold muzzle of the gun was directly pressed against Sudbai's forehead. He must have been injured, so his breathing was a little short, but he still threatened Sudbai viciously and said, "If you don't want to die, do as I say, reverse the car, drive back, and hurry up." Sudbai didn't know what to do for a while. He just grabbed the steering wheel with both hands. In the eyes of the other party, this expression means that this young man suddenly suffered such a thing and faced the threat of a gun. Some people may have been frightened to death. But in fact, for Sudbai, he really didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I actually had a gun pointed at my head by a gangster. How should I react? At this time, 2 more vans drove up from the opposite side. The van stopped in front, and then 7 or 8 people got out and rushed over quickly. Judging from their hand movements and the postures hidden in their coats, they should all be holding guns. In China, the probability of such a large-scale gunfight is really low, especially since this place is not far from Chengdu. Although it is still in a mountainous area, it is by no means a remote mountainous area. "Hurry up and reverse the car, do you hear me?" When the man saw this scene, he yelled at Sudbai. Sudbai did nothing, just took out a cigarette, and then handed another one to the person next to him. The other party was stunned and shouted, "Are you with them?" The man was obviously desperate, and at this moment, people who got off the van surrounded Sudbai's car. One of the men wearing a brown hat came up and opened the door on Sudbai's side to signal Sudbai to get out of the car. Sudbai didn't get out of the car, just shook the ashes and said, "What do you want to do quickly? I have something else to do." This is really not intentional. With Sudbai's current strength and level, there is no need to show off in front of ordinary people. Sudbai is just too lazy to pay attention. The man who had just held the gun against Sudbai dropped the gun, raised his hand, and got out of the car. He was immediately grabbed by someone and kicked to the ground. "Zhang Bei, run, run, boy, this is the first time in so many years that I have met someone who dares to play tricks on me." Huh. Sudbai, who was smoking, was suddenly stunned for a moment. Does he have the same name as Fatty? Come down and follow us. The other group of people obviously didn't intend to let Sudbai go, but they didn't seem to have the guts to kill people directly here. Drive the car and take the people away. Those 2 cars just rear-ended each other. They should still be able to drive. Speed up, the brown hat gave the order. Sudbai got out of the car, and the other person pushed Sudbai from behind, but found that he couldn't push him at all. He immediately used the butt of the gun and hit the back of Sudbai's head. Boom! In an instant, the opponent's entire body turned into a ball of blood mist and collapsed. This scene. Everyone around was stunned. These are all desperados, definitely not police, they may be drug dealers or doing other black things. So after they got over the initial fear, except for a few two who were still stunned, the others raised their guns and pointed them at Sudbai, pulled the trigger. Sudbai waved his hand, and all the bullets fired at him stopped in the air, and then the people around him were also imprisoned and unable to move. "Your name is Zhang Bei?" Sudbai bent down and asked. "Yes, my name is Zhang Bei." This guy's face was full of fear, because the scene was so incredible. Are you a human or a ghost?" Sudbai did not answer the question. Zhang Bei. He turned his head slightly and looked at the guys around him. "Is there anyone named Sudbai in there?" Although those people could not move, his mouth and eyes were not restricted. When Sudbai said these words, the others subconsciously looked at the brown hat. The brown hat's lips trembled a little, and he looked at Sudbai with frightened eyes, then nodded with difficulty and said, My name is Sudbai. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Long. Chapter 977. Everyone was pressed to the ground like chickens by Sudbai's pressure, and they knelt in a row. The two cars that collided and blocked the road were kicked off the cliff on the outside of the mountain road by Sudbai. Other vehicles passed by here from time to time, but no one dared to stop after seeing this scene. Without him, the few guns on the ground were scary enough. Sudbai knew that no matter what trouble he caused, the power of broadcasting would be revealed afterwards to eliminate the impact. Moreover, these people themselves deserved to die. If he killed them, he might not be rewarded by broadcasting, but he would definitely not be punished. Zhang Bei is not fat. Once you are used to Zhang Bei who looks like a mountain of meat and then look at this Zhang Bei in front of you, you will feel very uncomfortable. Of course, Sudbai's focus was still on the brown hat. Sudbai patted the other party's hat off and looked at it carefully for a while. Well, quite satisfied. Although there is a bit more sinister air between his eyebrows, overall, he looks pretty good, a bit like Daniel Wu's style of painting. After asking some questions, it was found that all of them were drug traffickers, but this time Zhang Bei wanted to take advantage of others and got away with it, and Sudbai was a middle-level member of another drug trafficking organization. The most important thing is that the ages of these two people are completely consistent with the ages of myself and Fatty, but their work and experience are completely different from that of Fatty and myself. Sudbai didn't believe this was a coincidence, and it definitely couldn't be a coincidence. Sudbai could even smell a hint of a broadcast conspiracy, or a conspiracy. This can also show the radio's enthusiasm and promotion of the listener destruction plan from another aspect. How to simply and quickly erase a person, or erase a group of people in large quantities, may be created for radio. Another group of ordinary people seemed to be simpler and more convenient. Sudbai believed that if he killed Sudbai and Zhang Bei in front of him now, another person named Sudbai and Zhang Bei would appear in a corner of the world tomorrow. In the past, Lychee wiped out a single city but failed to have the slightest impact on the stability of the world, let alone kill a few people now. Armor, that world, coffin. If the first emperor's plan had not been launched, then he would probably have to prepare his own coffin, because the broadcast seemed a little impatient, or the broadcast was convinced that the world had been basically cleaned up, and everything could end as soon as possible. If the 2 years that Sudbai and Fatty Monk had speculated before were recalculated based on what was discovered today, these 2 years might have to be discounted a lot. A year and a half. The 7th cigarette was smoked and thrown to the ground. The group of people kneeling on the ground just watched Sudbai smoking. No one dared to make the slightest move. Well, they couldn't move even if they wanted to. After a while, Sudbai stood up, got into his car and started the car. He didn't care about the group anymore. He drove towards Chengdu according to his original plan, and didn't bother to think about Sudbai after he left. Will Zhang Bei still be killed? Half an hour later, Sudbai got off the Chengdu Ring Expressway. Wuhao International Garden was next to Wuhao Avenue. The location was easy to find, and Sudbai had been there before, so it didn't take too long to find it. When Sudbai parked the car at the gate of the community, he picked up his mobile phone and sent a message to the WeChat account. I am coming. Immediately, Sudbai lay down halfway on the car seat. The other party didn't let him wait long, because as soon as he closed his eyes, the temperature around him suddenly dropped. This was a kind of chill that ordinary people couldn't feel, because it only targeted the soul. Sitting in the car behind him, a shadow appeared. Then, the shadow began to dissipate, revealing a man wearing a navy blue trench coat and a silver mask on his face. Sudbai looked behind him through the rearview mirror, especially staying on the other person's mask for a while. This mask was very familiar to him. Does it look familiar? The other party asked, his voice was very hoarse. This was not pretending, but more like the sequelae of a huge trauma to the other party's vocal cords. Some listeners will make up for their previous flaws after their life level improves, but some listeners will still selectively retain it. After all, this is their most authentic appearance. It's mine, Sudbai replied. He remembered this mask. When he made a deal with Fatty, the mask was part of Fatty's deal. This mask can stimulate people's inner emotions, especially when he is sick. Wearing this mask can have a stronger effect. However, this thing has long been of no use to Sudbai, and it has been thrown away long ago. Sudbai used to pick up a lot of senior people's magic weapons at the train station, but in fact, he just left them at Lao Fang's house and didn't do anything about them. Copycat, the other party replied. Take off the mask, Sudbai said calmly. I don't want others to wear the mask when talking to me. It will make me very uncomfortable. Hearing this, the other party was silent for a while, but still reached out and took off the mask. Behind the mask was a pitted face, very ugly, the kind of ugliness that would give ordinary people nightmares at night. Okay, put it on. Sudbai waved his hand, not minding that his words might irritate the other person. Of course, it wouldn't be too bad for a strong man who is at the same level as himself or even one level higher than himself to be irritated by his one or two taunts. Maybe. How many times has Boss Liang been pointed in the face and scolded as a coward, yet he still smiles. The other party put the mask back on. What's the matter? Sudbai asked. It's okay, I'm just curious, the other party answered succinctly. Curious? Judging from the probability that one of the 10 high-level listeners will finally achieve enlightenment, Sudbai remembers that the last batch of people from the East who took the train to that world had dozens of big shots. In other words, nowadays, less and less people in the East, there were hundreds of high-level listeners. But the connection between senior listeners is actually not as close as that between ordinary listeners and senior listeners. Firstly, everyone has their own things to do. Secondly, in today's general environment, there is no time and energy for you to have any more social gatherings. Yes, everyone only has their own small circle. I don't know you, Sudbai replied with confidence. He had never met the other person either in the real world or in the story world. Logically speaking, he and the other person should be strangers to each other. But I've always known you, and I've been looking forward to seeing you sometime, the masked man said seriously. You don't understand this desire. That sounds a little disgusting. The other party put his hand on Sudbai's shoulder. Sudbai glanced at it but said nothing or did anything. Actually, the bond between us is countless times deeper than the disgusting thing you think. There was a faint smile in the other party's words, which seemed to contain a touch of vicissitudes of life. Judging from Sudbai's recent terrifying advancement speed, the other party should have become an audience earlier than him, so this kind of vicissitudes of life is easy to understand. You came to me just to say this. I answered it, just out of curiosity. Goodbye then. Sudbai restarted the car. Aren't you curious about me? The other party asked. I don't have that much free time. Oh, the other party nodded, and the next moment, the temperature in the car suddenly dropped, and a chilling aura swept out and swept towards Sudbai. Sudbai's eyes turned cold, and he turned sideways and grabbed the other person's neck. The two of them immediately left the car and glided out. Don't toast or eat as a penalty. Sudbai held the other party in his hand and warned, I don't have time to play tricks with you now. Apart from the initial burst of energy, the other party did not make any other follow-up actions. At this time, Sudbai grabbed his neck and lifted him up, and he seemed very calm. I'm really curious about you, the masked man repeated again. I've been tortured by my curiosity for you for several years. You won't understand this feeling. If you keep talking this kind of nonsense, it will really anger me. Sudbai tilted his head slightly and stared at the masked man. You make me feel very uncomfortable. Buzz. A white wave swept out, and the surrounding shops and pedestrians fell into a state of stillness. Sudbai's arm holding the other person's neck also suffered a terrible cold stimulation at this time. A disdainful smile appeared on the corner of Sudbai's mouth. I guessed it right. The opponent is indeed a higher level than himself, but he is not a physical enhancer. Now that he is close to him, it is naturally difficult to pose a real threat to him. Now Sudbai has this confidence. I can understand how you feel, but you can't understand how I feel. I came to Sichuan this time specifically to find you. I have collected everything about you. I care about you very much because I care about you. Interested, so even though we have never met, I am no stranger to you. No. In this world, after your parents leave, there may be no one who has a closer connection with you than me. Bang. Sudbai flicked his backhand and slammed the opponent to the ground. A huge ice hole was directly smashed into the ground. The opponent's body was held up by a piece of ice sculpture, and his figure slowly changed from lying down to standing up straight. Are you mentally ill? Sudbai asked. He. The other party smiled, then stretched out his hand and took off the mask on his face again. At this time, the pitted and extremely ugly face actually started to squirm, as if a kind of process was going on. Repair. Slowly. The face of a young man was revealed, without the bumps, and even, looked very handsome. This is an unfamiliar face. But it was another face that made Sudbai's heart suddenly throb. Sudbai's eyes became solemn and serious at this time. Immediately, Sudbai stretched out his hand, put it on the other person's face and touched it gently. Then, he slowly said in an incredible tone. This is, my, body. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 978. This is, my, body. At this moment, Sudbai finally understood where the sense of familiarity came from. The face in front of him was indeed a face that Sudbai had never seen before, but that kind of familiarity and appropriateness could not be faked. With Sudbai's current level of life, it is obviously impossible for him to have hallucinations from time to time like those patients with schizophrenia. Even the latest and most cruel drugs cannot have the slightest impact on Sudbai's mental level. Influence. At the beginning, Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiu relied on cloning technology and the use of bronze boxes to transform two people into one person. Finally, through the method of Master Zhao, they succeeded in making this target carry the virus to achieve their ultimate goal, so, in fact, Su Yuhang created two children. If Sudbai is called De Bai here, then it is obvious that there is another Er Bai. However, Er Bai, who could have become an ordinary person and lived an ordinary life, was killed by Sudbai because he was unwilling to take back his body. Even though he actually got the final liberation, he and Sudbai, who were clones in the previous story world, could be regarded as resolving each other's hearts. But in fact, there was one thing that even Sudbai had not thought about carefully, that is, the original your own body. Where did you go? In the past, Sudbai thought that Su Yuhang might have disposed of it, or even throw it away casually, but now it seems that things are not like this, because the guy in front of him, his body, came from his own body. Tool. But this guy is not Erbe. So, do you understand? The man looked at Sudbai with a smile. I have been using your body, and until now, it is impossible for me not to be curious about you. Sudbai took a step back, as if it was still difficult to accept such a situation. Although Sudbai had long regarded himself as the real Sudbai and no longer had any mental shortcomings, it was still a little uncomfortable to suddenly see that his original body was being used by others. How did you get it? Sudbai asked. After the initial surprise, Sudbai quickly regained his composure. He took out a cigarette, bit it in his mouth, lit it, and took a puff. In fact, it's hard to tell how much attachment and obsession Sudbai had towards his original body. He is Sudbai, and now his body is his own body. There is no need to involve or tie him down. When I became an ordinary listener, I carried out a real-life mission, and my body was severely injured in a secret place, but there, I found a sleeping body. It has no soul, but it has been alive, and it can even be seen that it has been growing and growing. This is an extremely good situation for seizing a body. Then, I took possession of it. Later, as my strength improved, after investigation, I discovered some interesting information, and finally, I determined who the original owner of the body I am currently using was. But you also surprised me. Your growth rate can indeed be described as horrifying. So, you asked me out just to satisfy your curiosity, Subai asked. The other party nodded and put on the silver mask again. Then it's okay now. Subai didn't want to entangle too much, let alone take the body back, because it was completely unnecessary. It can only be said that the appearance of this body is still the same as what Subai would have looked like as a young man if he had grown up in the past, but the inside has already undergone huge changes with the strength and life level of the masked man in front of him. If it were him, the original pure body still had some collection value for Subai, but the current one, apart from having the same appearance, is already a different body. Even if it is used for DNA testing, it will not be found to be similar to Subai. The result of a half-dime relationship. It's okay, the other party's answer was as straightforward as ever, but I want to remind you one thing. It's a reward for always using your body. After all, if I had encountered your body in a critical moment, I might have died years ago. Say Subai blew out a smoke ring. Last week, in a secret place in the Kunlun Mountains on the northeastern border, a jade platform appeared. It was acquired by a high-level listener. The jade platform was inherited from the Qin dynasty. It is said that it is attached to the remnant soul of the alchemist Ho Sheng of the Qin dynasty. Hearing this, Subai's face became a little more serious. Ho Sheng was one of the four great alchemists under the first emperor, along with Lu Sheng, Su Fu, and Han Zhong. He had just received Lu Sheng's warning, and now Ho Sheng also did the backhand also appear? During this period, the backup plans reserved by the first emperor that had not been destroyed began to appear one by one, and the eldest son Fusu, who came out of the Lashan giant Buddha, could only be regarded as a prelude. And the remnant soul gave a location coordinate, saying that there was a way for everyone to gain relief and get rid of their bad luck, the masked man narrated calmly. Which position? Subai asked. If my analysis is correct, that location should be where you were before coming to Chengdu. The masked man looked into Subai's eyes and replied, in other words, that method is in your hands. That armor? Of course Subai knew what that method was, and of course he had the armor in his hands, but the prerequisite was that a strong man who was at least as strong as himself would take the initiative to put it on and sacrifice it for it to be effective. Yes, I do. At this time, there is nothing to hide. I arrived relatively late, the masked man suddenly said. Someone else should have gone there by now. Why didn't I receive any news? Subai didn't believe it. In fact, when he learned that the armor could not be used normally and was being passed on to be used as a sacrifice, Subai didn't think much of it. But Subai didn't believe it. What Bai didn't understand was that although he didn't have much contact or communication with other listeners, he had Fatty Monk Buddha and the others around him. Why didn't they receive any news about this turmoil? The masked man replied, because the senior audience who discovered the Yutai in Kunlun Mountain are Westerners. This answer is very direct and straightforward. If the other party is a high-level Western audience, the communication between the two parties will not be smooth due to the gap between the Eastern and Western audience circles. In addition, if the other party deliberately hides the information, it will cause it is not difficult to block a message, and because there are only a few hundred high-level listeners in the East and West, in other words, the number of intermediate and high-level senior listeners will be even smaller. Once the number of people is reduced, confidentiality will naturally work. It would be much easier to do. In other words, you asked me out on purpose. Until now, Subai's face did not show any anger at being cheated. Not to mention that there was Buddha sitting there. As long as Buddha could resist and delay for a while, it wouldn't take long for him to rush back immediately. When I came here, I drove 40 minutes. If I drove back at full speed, the time would be further shortened. The absolute speed of the advanced listener is actually not inferior to the real version of Superman, especially the advanced listener with enhanced body. That's right, the masked man answered somewhat ambiguously. But I'm curious as to why you know this. Subai threw the cigarette butt on the ground and stepped on it with the soles of his shoes. My name is Lyman, the masked man replied. Sure enough, he is a Westerner, a high-level Western listener and a powerful person. Subai suddenly felt so ridiculous. Well, that bastard Suyuhang placed his body somewhere and still kept it active. As a result, it was actually obtained by a Western audience. Forget it, even Qin Chao Ho Sheng left behind. It's a bit of a trap that Westerners have also acquired it. That thing is of no use to you if you ask for it, Subai replied, unless one of you is willing to sacrifice it. How difficult would it be to capture a high-level audience member alive and force him to wear armor? If it was very simple and easy, Subai and Foye would not have directly regarded the purpose of this armor as a last resort after discovering its properties. Isn't there something ready-made in front of me? The masked man asked, pretending to be surprised, as if Subai's question was not a problem at all to him. You want to capture me alive? Subai showed a disdainful smile. The masked man was silent for a while, and then said, I know you very well, very well. So what? I know that there is at least one senior audience member sitting there, but I know even more that there is an orphanage there. Compared with the difficulty of snatching that thing, compared with the difficulty of capturing alive a strong person who meets the requirements of the audience. Just destroy that orphanage. It's the simplest thing. The masked man gave his own reply. He is threatening himself. Threatening yourself with the little guy's life. Yes. The armor can be carried and transferred, and it doesn't matter if it is even taken away. After all, whoever takes the orphanage and finally captures the qualified listeners to sacrifice them will be beneficial to other listeners. This thing does not necessarily have to be done by oneself. But the orphanage cannot be transferred, and if the other party simply wants to destroy the orphanage, even if Buddha is sitting there, even if he is sitting there at this time, there is no way to resist or stop it. This is equivalent to an advanced mathematics body being simplified into 4 arithmetic operations. Are you threatening me? Subai pointed at himself. He did not become angry because of this, nor did he make any angry or fierce gestures. Instead, he seemed calmer than before. Ah! The masked man made a long sound, as if he was thinking, meditating, or hesitating, and then replied in a very relaxed and happy tone. So be it. You, and your son, choose one of the two. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 979. In a manor in Manchester, Hill slowly walked back to the basement with the glass of red wine he had just poured for himself. The basement was very large, several times the size of the residential area above. If it were an ordinary person, when you walk in, you might mistakenly think you have entered a museum. Just because there are many ancient objects on display in the basement, each of which is placed in a specific area, their value and appearance even exceed those of the British Museum. Of course, there are many formations here. Not to mention the formations in the manor, even the formations in the basement may be lost here if a strong person at the beginning of the advanced audience sneaks in. The things here are all Hill's treasures. Naturally, he will not allow others to take advantage of them. You must know that if he hadn't been suppressed by his strength now, he might still be able to retain a few pieces of his own collection here. Is an unknown quantity. Placed in the center and most conspicuous place is a white armor, or it can be called a holy suit, because its style is really similar to the Japanese anime Saint Seiya. This is also one of the things that Hills attaches most importance to at present, but it still has some minor flaws and damage that have not been repaired, so Hills is not in a hurry to use it. Furthermore, with his current high-end audience, In the real world, except for a few people who have just recently become enlightened, when he goes to deal with other people, it really doesn't matter whether they wear holy clothes or not. It is undoubtedly a very pleasant thing to admire your own collection while sipping red wine. Hills has moved all the suitable and valuable things from the ancient battlefield site, and even a few suspected large ones. The corpses of the boss-level listeners. As for why the corpses of these boss-level listeners appeared there, it is actually easy to guess. The only thing that surprised Hills was that the boss-level listeners in the previous world were also in human form. It's just that the body is smaller than today's people. At this moment, a ray of rays of light suddenly appeared in the basement, but this ray of rays of light seemed to have encountered some resistance and could not really penetrate. Hills waved his hand to open the formation, and the rays of light gathered here, revealing the shadow of a woman. "Chris, have you brought the things I asked you to exchange for me?" Hills asked, taking a sip of red wine. He needs some special materials to repair the things he brought from the ancient battlefield ruins, and these materials cannot be exchanged in the WeChat store. In fact, after reaching the senior level, the WeChat store is almost useless and of little value. Even better listeners will find Wadian useless when compared to ordinary listeners. "Sorry, I couldn't find Macron and Pjanik," Chris replied. "They should not be in the story world." Hills shook the red wine glass and a smile appeared on his lips. "I contacted Zach and Chico's last night, but they ignored me." Chris wanted to reply, "Is it because you are so unpopular? Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to become the guardian of the short-lived ghost in the place of enlightenment." Of course, Hills himself would not have this kind of consciousness, especially since he had received a lot of inheritance from the place of enlightenment a while ago and had just brought out so many things at the ancient battlefield site, and these things are very important to those who want to prove the truth. It definitely has unparalleled attraction for Tao's high-level listeners, and he will naturally become a favorite among them. They have no reason to play silent with him collectively. Moreover, what surprised Hills even more was that Macron, Pjanik, Zach and Chico's were all at the advanced level of advanced listeners. These four guys stayed at home uneasy and held back their energy to attack the sermon. But suddenly disappeared while playing together? Hills took out his cell phone again and dialed a number named Lyman in the phone book, but the call showed that it was not in the service area. Hills suddenly laughed twice. It didn't matter that the four guys suddenly disappeared, but it was meaningful that Lyman also lost contact. That guy with an oriental face has always had a bad style that makes everyone drunk, but I am alone. He always wants to control everything in his own hands. To be honest, Hills has been unhappy with him for a long time. Huh? Hills suddenly became confused again. What on earth are they going to do, to deliberately go behind my back and not take me to play? Isn't Hills also living in England? I originally thought Lyman would invite him to come with him, the big man Macron said to himself while drinking vodka. Pjanik, who looked very thin and tall next to him, smiled slightly and said, "Lyman explained to me that the Chinese named Subai and Hills were both the guardians of the proving ground. The two of them still kept in touch after the Tao land was closed, and their relationship was unusual, so it's best not to let Hills know about this matter." Macron burped and patted his belly. "You said, if you threaten him with his son's life, would he really be so stupid as to sacrifice himself for a so-called son? It shouldn't be that stupid, but our purpose this time is just to get that thing." That guy also has a few high-level audience partners with good connections. Although his level is not high, he is not that easy to deal with. It's just a negotiation method to make him retreat and compromise. Of course, if he is really stupid enough to sacrifice himself, it will save us trouble. Our original plan was to get that thing and go to Africa or the United States to capture a strong listener and sacrifice it. Although we could mobilize more European listeners to join in at that time, it was not convenient to do it in one step. It seems that because of the legacy of the Macedonian Empire and the Qin dynasty, the regions with the largest and strongest audience base in the world are Europe and China. There are also listeners in other regions of the world, but in terms of the base at the bottom and the strength and number of the top leaders, there is still a big difference from those two regions. The reason for this may also be that the dynasties in these two regions had the strongest and most effective resistance to broadcasting. Instead, they were favored by broadcasting and more people chose to become here. The audience accepts cultivation. So, as long as you get that thing, you don't have to worry about no other high-level listeners joining in. After all, this is something that is collectively beneficial to all current high-level listeners. Of course, the unlucky guy who was sacrificed must be eliminated first. Both the first emperor and Alexander the Great left behind a lot of backups. In other words, in the East, there were beings like Lu Sheng and Han Zhong who appeared like prophets to provide information. In the West, this kind of thing also happened constantly. The purpose is nothing more than to use the power of the listeners who want to escape the fate of being destroyed during this period to help support their arrangements 2,000 years ago. This is actually more powerful than going through all the hard work to hide more strength and launch it today. To be effective and efficient, there is only one senior audience member there now. Zack stretched out his hand to push his frame. In fact, we can choose the simplest way to snatch that thing with the initial peak strength. But what if there's an unexpected surprise? It was Chico's who spoke. I'm going to restrain that guy first, and then wait for the results from Lyman. You don't have to come over. Lyman said that we'd better not escalate the matter completely. After all, the foundation of the Eastern audience circle is no worse than ours. Our first goal is to get that thing and hold that thing in our hands. As for whether the Chinese named Subai is willing to sacrifice himself for his son, it is just an extra step. There is no need to force it. As long as if we target him alone, the rest of the audience will turn a blind eye and not resist and reject us. After all, when we enter that world in the next stage, we have to cooperate with Eastern audiences. Tomorrow is the day to go to Lhasa, so today Suner started her training according to the usual rules, but she no longer blasted rocks, but started practicing Qigong. Suner's initial strengthening route was actually the same as Su's early training. Bai is very similar, both are more messy, so they have more things to cultivate. However, Suner, who had just fallen into trance, suddenly opened her eyes. She saw a man wearing a white raincoat standing in front of her, but she had no idea when the man appeared. She's not bad. Chico's didn't have any special interest in Suner. He just stretched out his hand to put this woman into a deep sleep. He didn't think that a female listener who was not even a senior among senior listeners could do anything. The value is, at best, just for the entertainment needs of high-end listeners. This situation is also very common in the West, so Chico's has no intention of using this woman as a threatening hostage. However, just when Chico's hand was about to fall, a figure wearing a cassock suddenly appeared in front of him. At the same time, a hatchet flew out of the air and slashed directly at Chico's wrist. Very alert. Chico smiled slightly and didn't take it seriously. He just turned his wrist and raised it. There was only a buzz sound, and Buddha took a few steps back, while Chico's remained in place, except that a small cut appeared on his wrist. Only then did he realize the little beginner in front of him. It doesn't seem to be as unbearable as previously expected. This guy should be about to reach the intermediate level. You should be a guest from afar, but you don't look like a guest like this, Buddha said, looking at Chico's in front of him. We came uninvited. Chico said nonchalantly that there are very few big-name listeners in the world nowadays. One of the two big-name listeners in the East is in Guangxi and the other is in Qinhuangdao. Their locations have been determined in advance, so there is no need to worry about the sudden appearance of big-name listeners. As for the rest of the high-level Eastern listeners are probably busy with advancement and enlightenment at the moment, and they don't have the heart to meddle in other people's business. Moreover, they also have vested interests in what they and others want to do. Purpose? Buddha asked. We are not talking to you, and we have no ill intentions towards you, Chicos explained. We just want to take something away and do something that is beneficial to everyone. In addition, we also want that orphanage. Chicos pointed to the orphanage on the opposite hill. Oh, then let's fight. Buddha's answer was simple. What? Chicos felt that he had heard wrongly. Fight, Buddha repeated. Kill me, otherwise I will not allow you to touch that orphanage. Some things can be discussed, and some things can be compromised, but Lord Buddha will never allow the little guy to be taken away or hurt by others again under his nose. This happened to him last time at Lao Fang's house in Shanghai, so, Buddha will not let this happen again. This is not because of Sudbai's face. Sudbai doesn't have that much face to make Buddha resolute to this point. The only reason is that child. I had hugged him and teased him before. He also chuckled in his arms. Moreover, after Sudbai brought the little guy out of the story world, both himself and Chi Lu had blessed the child, and this had already formed a relationship similar to that of a godfather. When the brothers are together, they can also calculate each other's gains and losses a little, so Chi Lu did not give up his hope of advancing to help Sudbai when he was under Sanjiang. But Buddha believes that if Chi Lu were here alone now, he would make the same choice as himself. Everyone struggled. It's to live. And living without any persistence or bottom line might as well be dead. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 980. The person in front of me is difficult to deal with, and Buddha knows this very well. In fact, the other party has made their meaning very clear. What they want is nothing more than the armor. Or, the other party failed to know that the thing that can be sacrificed is the armor? Otherwise, there is no need to talk so much nonsense to myself. This possibility seems to be quite high. The Qin general's armor was resealed and hidden by him after Sudbai left. Because of the special nature of Qin general's armor, it is impossible to detect it with spiritual consciousness and mental power, unless the man in front of him is willing to put the two armors together. They searched through the mountains one by one and tried one by one, otherwise it would be difficult to determine which one they needed. Furthermore, can I try this casually? It has to be said that Buddha's guess is indeed true. Even Lyman did a lot of deductions and investigations after learning the message left by Ho Sheng. In addition, he has always been paying attention to Sudbai. There is still no way to determine what the item that can be sacrificed looks like. After all, Sudbai and Buddha just discovered this morning. You Chinese have a saying, treat the mantis as a chariot. You are no match for me, and I can also tell you that there are several companions behind me. Your struggle and resistance are actually meaningless, and we will not hurt you. In fact, this matter will benefit all senior listeners collectively, and even indirectly benefit all listeners. Chicos felt that he had a good temper today. Of course, this was also because there was a big goal pressing on him. They were not unscrupulous. Even if they succeeded in the end, their group would finally have the opportunity to enter the next world and face the next world. When the world is in danger, the two strongest audience circles in the East and the West still have to cooperate and stick together. If the two sides cause a wide-reaching confrontation between the high-level listeners in the East and the West at this time, it will be tantamount to setting the stage for the future. He himself was sentenced to death with a reprieve. I said, if you want to touch the orphanage, kill me first. Buddha did not show any expression of joking or showing off. At the same time, that ray of merit and virtue was also absorbed into his body. If we really fight against each other later, come on, you may have to try to advance in battle, otherwise it will be too difficult to face high-level opponents with basic strength. Let your godson be stolen twice under your nose. If that's the case, then what's the point of living? Oh, Chicos responded, opening his palms, and a ball emerged at this time, with an aura of isolation. "You can't stop me." Chico's was stating a fact. As a high-level expert who also practiced formations, he had the capital and confidence to trap a low-level expert in a short time by relying on his formation abilities. The ball split open, shrouding Suner and Buddha inside. This is the gentlest method that Chicos can choose. They are not here to intensify the conflict. They just want to make a fait accompli. They are not even willing to let the Chinese named Subai take the initiative to sacrifice for his son. It's not a goal they need to accomplish, but they have to try, right? The trapped Buddha immediately sat cross-legged, and the Buddhist charm was directly absorbed by force. There was no need for retreat, and there was no time to retreat. At this time, the strength should be improved first. If there are any sequelae and side effects, it doesn't matter. Seeing Chicos turn around and walk towards the orphanage, Buddha felt very calm inside. At this moment, he seemed to be able to feel the same feeling that Subai had when he was ill. Hysteria. Once a person is angry to an extreme, he will appear very calm. Suner tried to bombard the barrier in front of him at this time, but to no avail. Even Buddha had temporarily given up on bombarding the barrier with his current state, let alone Suner. Turning her head and taking a look at Buddha, who was sitting cross-legged, Suner naturally couldn't tell that Buddha was advancing. Therefore, in her heart, she may have felt that Buddha had given up. What she said before was just to look good. But after Suner breathed a few times, she continued to bombard the barrier tirelessly. Even the magical weapon she was originally planning to choose as her natural weapon also had some cracks in the constant bombardment, but she didn't care. Buddha was naturally able to sense the situation outside, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Perhaps, my strength is much higher than that of Suner, and my level is also a level that the other party needs to look up to." But both people seem to have made the same choice at this time. Sometimes doing it knowing that it cannot be done. Just for peace of mind. The orphanage was right in front of him. Chicos walked up slowly. As a high-level expert who also practiced as an array mage, he was a little excited about the array in front of him and could even be said to be worshipping. Feeling. There is no other reason. As long as you think that this formation was left by that woman, as an audience in England, you will have a different feeling. After all, the great terror that woman once left in England will almost always accompany him. The growth of an audience. What an exquisite formation, Chicos sighed. If possible, he would actually break the formation and take out the child inside and hold it in his hand. The threat effect would be better, but this formation, it's really so meticulous that it's not the strongest, but it's the most helpless. Any advanced listener can destroy it, but the contents inside will not be preserved. Chicos calmed down his mood, but at this moment, two cat meows came from behind him. Chicos turned around and saw two black cats. A monster. At this time, Jixiang and Ruyi expressed their welcome attitude to the visitors in the most direct way. The two black cats turned into two black lightnings and roared into the sky. A barrier appeared in front of Chicos, which directly deflected the attack of the two black cats. It's actually a monster with elementary strength. A dark purple light flashed in Chicos's left eye, and a slender whip appeared in his hand, and then he began to swing the whip. Snapped. 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 Every swing of the whip carries a powerful force of space strangulation, which not only blocks Jixiang and Ruyi's offensive, but also causes considerable trauma to their bodies and souls. It's just that the bigger Ruyi gets, the more excited he becomes. Even if the opponent in front of him is very strong, he has stayed with Lao Fugui in the place of enlightenment for so long, and has already developed a habitual killing mentality towards such blonde and blue-eyed guys. In other words, it is actually spoiled by the old rich man. And auspicious. Its cat eyes were no longer as pure as amber, but instead held a kind of bloodthirsty madness. Chico seems to be in some trouble. There are actually two elementary monsters. Macron drank half a bottle of vodka and his face was a little red. This was the reason why he drank with his strength sealed, otherwise alcohol would not be good for him at all. It doesn't work at all and doesn't taste good when you drink it. Let him play. Let's wait for news from Lehman. Maybe the Chinese named Subai will be here soon. We can just stop him then. I really hope he can accept this proposal. Although the audience is very selfish, there are still people who are single-minded. If that guy is also this kind of person, it will save us a lot of trouble. It doesn't matter if you give it a try. After all, it's not easy to go to Africa or America to catch a qualified audience, even if there will be a lot of us by then. The street on this side of Wuhao Avenue was still in a state of stagnation. A layer of undetectable frost covered the ground and everyone here, making the surrounding area as quiet as a world of ice and snow for a short period of time. Lyman looked at Subai in front of him. He was looking forward to the other party's answer. Even if he didn't want to in the end, as long as he forced him to hand over the thing, he would be considered a success. Unless he had to, he would not go out of his way to bring it. If someone comes to hunt a high-level Eastern listener, this may cause the entire Eastern listener group to fall into an atmosphere of the rabbit dies and the fox is sad. Even in that world, once the two sides are separated due to this, Lehman will not understand it. Hope to see. However, if Subai is willing to bow his head and take the initiative to sacrifice in exchange for his son's life, then everyone will be happy. Although this possibility is not high, Lehman knows the importance of that child to Subai. It's impossible for Bai to just give up. No matter what the result is, he will be invincible after all. But then, Subai's reaction was a little beyond his expectation, or in other words, Lyman never thought that such a situation would happen. Subai slowly unbuttoned his collar and exposed his chest, as if he suddenly felt very hot. His face was still calm. It seems that the other party has always maintained a calmness from the first time he met him until now, which makes Lyman a little uncomfortable, because based on his understanding of Subai, the other party is not a calm character. It's been a long time since anyone threatened me. A smile appeared at the corner of Subai's mouth. Putting aside the guys in the story world and the Qin dynasty, he really hadn't been threatened by the audience for a long time. On the one hand, it was because his strength had improved, and on the other hand, because he was actually very good. Don't take the initiative to cause trouble. You can tell me your choice, Lyman said. My son, you can kill if you want. I won't stop you. Subai's answer was simple and straightforward, but as many of you come this time as many will die. Believe me, unless I fall, this will not happen once, none of you will ever return to the West alive. Lyman's eyes narrowed. His face was hidden under the mask and his expression could not be known, but he could tell that Subai was not bluffing. Sure enough, his temper had been exploded, even though he looked so calm on the surface. Then, give that thing to us. We can take a step back and not take action against your son. You can go back directly now, or make a call to contact them. You will know that I am not lying to you. That the orphanage is definitely under our control now. Lyman felt that he could take a step back. The guy in front of him would not sacrifice himself for his child. Have you taken a step back from me? The aura on Subai's body burst out directly, and strong winds shot out in all directions, not caring that this was the city of Chengdu. Lowering his head and looking at his almost trembling palms, Subai's smile became clearer and clearer. He said slowly in a tone that was almost trembling with excitement. I really want to thank you, I really, I haven't been sick for a long time, I really miss this feeling. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 981. The long-lost throbbing, the long-lost impulse, the long-lost complete indulgence. These things originally belonged to Subai's label, and they were the driving force that forced Subai to kill people again and again before he became an audience. Later, they also appeared again and again in the extremely complex conflicts and interest entanglements among the early audiences. Even if Chengshenru monk felt helpless at that time when Subai got sick again and again. However, the last time he really got sick was a long time ago, and even Subai couldn't remember it, and he was a little unfamiliar with this feeling. After all, as his strength increases, the number of people Subai comes into contact with or who are worthy of facing him has become less and less. Coupled with Subai's cold personality, he rarely takes the initiative to get involved in some right and wrong. And then faced huge and desperate pressure again and again. This purest and most primitive feeling has not been felt for a long, long time. Familiar. Trembling. The joy radiating from the depths of the soul, every cell in the body seems to be injected with stimulants at this time. This feeling can almost make people faint. The kind that does not require too much thinking, does not require too much calculation, does not require too much care, and is purely focused on the direct desire to tear apart the opponent in front of you. Perhaps, this is the true meaning of life for Subai. Tracing back to the origin, it may still come from the shadow caused by Subai, who was placed in the petri dish and poked his head out again and again, and then was pressed down by Su Yuhang again and again. Lyman's eyes hidden under the silver mask became more and more profound. He could feel a dangerous aura coming towards him. He expected that Subai would have a bad temper, and he also knew some things about Subai. But he didn't expect that the other party would be so direct and straightforward this time, even at the cost of completely ruining the life of his still living child, choosing this most lose-lose response. Lyman knew about Subai's illness or choice habit, but he still believed that the importance of Subai's son would make Subai make choices according to Lyman's wishes. But for Subai, Lyman hit his back this time. Even if Lyman and others just came to snatch or steal General Qin's armor, Subai would not be too angry. Even if the other party wanted to, if he were to be captured alive and sacrificed, he would certainly resist, but he would not be so hysterical. That's what's wrong. The other party tried to threaten himself with the little guy's life. Even though Lyman had already said take a step back /. But for Subai, there was no way out. When Lyman threatened him with the little guy, in Subai's eyes, he and the Western audience he brought this time were the ones he must kill. Subai didn't think about his own strength, nor did he measure the opponent's strength level. In this state, no need to think too much. There is no need to think too much. Body slowly rickets up. Subai's eyes turned white at this moment, and in the white, there was also a hint of sinister red. Black flames rose up on Subai's body. This was the result of the zombie's evil spirit being released. At the same time, Subai's body was shaking or trembling and breathing heavily, like a zombie. But when the shadow behind Subai, whose whole body was bound by chains, slowly merged with Subai, it presents a strange beauty. It was as if chains from all directions in the world were trying to trap him, and even in this situation, he still continued to vent his anger and roar. This state, this scene, is a bit like Crazy Yagamayan in the most popular fighting game in arcades back then. This is not a good choice. Lyman raised his hand and instantly formed 7 ice walls in front of him. He actually still had some doubts and disbelief, but the aura revealed by Subai still made him he had some fears. It is true that he is a high-level powerhouse, but Subai is not much different. After all, Subai is also at the peak of the middle level, and his actual combat power cannot be measured by pure realm. Next moment, Subai took the lead in starting the offensive. The fingertips with long black ink nails instantly penetrated 7 ice walls and pounced directly on Lyman. Lyman took a deep breath. He knew that Subai's posture was indeed a fight to the death, because in the ice wall he had just arranged, he had actually added a lot of additional damage belonging to the ice attribute. Under normal circumstances, he should never fight. Choosing this method of resisting forcefully, but Subai did it this way, it reflects more of an attitude. Lyman stretched out his hand, and an ice blade appeared in his palm. Clang! The skate and Sudbai's palm touched together, making a series of harsh friction sounds. Sudbai's palm did not fall off, but only left a medium-deep scar. On the contrary, the skate in Lyman's hand directly cracks appeared and then completely collapsed. Faced with Sudbai's unconditional attack, even Lyman, who was one level higher than Sudbai, felt extremely clear pressure. Sudbai's offensive did not stop. The opponent was obviously strengthened like an ice magician. As long as he kept getting close and applying pressure, he could guarantee that he could always suppress the opponent. Once the opponent pulled away, it's very detrimental to yourself. Ice. Lyman doesn't intend to continue to pester Sudbai. He wants to leave here and go to the orphanage. At this time, he may feel that Sudbai is in the mood of impulsiveness. Maybe give him some time to cool down, and he should make a decision. What you think is a wise choice? Ultimately, Lyman brought 4 high-level British audiences to China this time. He did not come to fight and kill at all. The current environment and the situation he may face after the event is completed are not suitable for this time. This was the beginning of a direct confrontation between Eastern and Western audiences, and Sudbai was obviously not that easy to talk about. In the past, if the armored man wanted to kill Sudbai, he had to resort to isolation and constant pressure. This actually shows from the side how difficult it is to kill Sudbai completely now. Perhaps, Sudbai's attack power is not the strongest, nor does he have the most attack methods. Just like playing a game, due to his level and equipment, Sudbai's output is not top-notch, but his health tank is thick and his defense is the strength is also strong, and the most abnormal thing is the speed of blood regeneration. Ice. When Lyman chose to freeze Sudbai temporarily to get a chance to escape, Sudbai also shouted these 2 words at the same time. With Sudbai as the center, a layer of ice expanded directly, which was regarded as 2 same-sex forces. After the collision, they cancelled each other out. Sudbai's speed and figure were not significantly slowed down by the other party's ice. Finally, Sudbai got close to Lyman, and Lyman was unable to cast the next spell. This was extremely fatal for a pure magician. The end that awaited him might be severe damage, even if he did not die directly. But at this moment, Lyman's arms directly turned into ice sculptures, using the power of his arms to clamp Sudbai's shoulders in a way similar to sumo wrestling, and then planned to throw Sudbai away. However, Sudbai's feet seemed to be firmly attached to the earth. Lyman was not able to destroy Sudbai's center of gravity immediately, and the 2 sides fell into an awkward stalemate. Roar! A low roar came from Sudbai's body. Before Lyman could figure out what Sudbai was going to do, he saw a white light emitting from Sudbai's body. Then, it was a violent explosion. Boom! Lyman was hit hard and flew away. The huge inertia directly penetrated a tall building in the distance and then slid hundreds of meters on the ground, leaving a long ravine. When Lyman staggered to his feet again, not only were his clothes torn, exposing wounds with deep visible bones, but the mask on his face had been completely wiped out, revealing a pitted face. The power of the explosion was very terrifying, but the scope of the explosion was very small. It was nothing more than an area with a radius of 10 meters with Sudbai as the center. Therefore, it only left a large hole with terrifying depth on the ground, but it did not cause much damage to the surrounding areas. However, Lyman, who had just become entangled with Sudbai within the scope of the explosion, actually withstood that terrifying blow, or, an explosion. The secret of ice, annihilation. Lyman crossed his hands and made a secret. At the same time, a blue hexagonal star appeared on his chest. Immediately afterwards, the water molecules in the surrounding air quickly condensed into ice spikes with murderous intent, whizzing toward the front with overwhelming force. The area that had just been exploded was plowed again by ice edges at this time. But there was no trace of relaxation on Lyman's face, because he could sense that even though Subai had just taken the initiative to self-destruct, and had gone through another secret wash of his own, but Subai's aura still existed firmly. "Give me that thing, and we will leave without choosing you as a sacrifice," Lyman said. At the position next to the deep cave in front, drops of blood began to gather from all directions, slowly turning into a bloody pool, and in this pool, Subai slowly grew. Body shape. Subai's body was still stooped, and his heavy breathing had not stopped, but it did not mean that he was tired, but it meant that the excitement was not declining now, but was getting stronger. He. Subai's laughter seemed very unscrupulous, but it also made Lyman lose his temper. Whoever faced an opponent who could use self-destruction as a normal attack method would lose his temper, and it might even make you ignore it. The fact that you are actually a level above him. "I can't hear what you said." Subai's arms drooped, and more than 80% of the body's repairs were completed. At this time, he turned his head slightly and glanced at Lyman in the distance. His body was bumping up and down with his breathing, like a path of choosing someone. A devouring mad dog. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 982. I can't hear what you said. This question was tinged with clear sarcasm. Do you want to start? Do you want to end it when you want? Yes. I understand your thinking. I also know your plan. But I'm sorry. This year. Either I die. Either you die. Things are as simple as that. At the moment Subai's body recovered, nearly a quarter of the green vegetation in Wuhao district fell into a state of decay and necrosis. Subai did not choose to absorb the blood of living people. Killing, broadcast will not let him go. After all, there is no need to get Lichi's disease without Lichi's strength. Secondly, compared to humans who have an independent soul as an individual, the vitality of vegetation is more convenient and easier to absorb and digest. It is faster, and its side effects and impacts will be much lower than the former. Subai suddenly raised his head, stretched out his arms, and let out a roar. The originally clear sky suddenly turned into dark clouds, as if a demon from hell came out of the gate of hell and appeared in the world. Lyman clearly sensed that Subai's momentum had not declined at all due to his previous self-destruction attack. Instead, he had become stronger and sharper than before. Lyman knew exactly what this meant. That is, the opponent has gained insights and progress in the battle just now or in the current situation and situation. This perception and progress does not only refer to the improvement of realm. In fact, Subai's realm has not changed. She is still at the peak of the intermediate level, but Chen Ryu, who was a high-level listener before, was able to equal the big brother in terms of combat power, and the same is true. This is an explosion of accumulation, an explosion of suppression, and even more an explosion of thinking. I don't know when it started. Subai has become accustomed to the most primitive and direct way of close combat, but this kind of the steady fighting style always gave Subai a sense of confinement, and it was difficult to obtain that hearty fighting feeling. And now, Subai understood clearly what he was missing. When your strength becomes stronger, when your body becomes more powerful, when your recovery ability becomes more and more abnormal, when your life-saving means become more and more abundant. But at this time, you have gradually lost the bachelor spirit that you had before when you first became an audience. You are like a barefooted and fearless person before, but now you have put on armor and become a war horse. Now that the knight has his own retinue, he begins to think about how to cherish his life and face the battle in the most stable way. This, for Subai, is actually the opposite. Fortunately, it's not too late to wake up now. Lyman only saw Subai in front of him turn into a black shadow, and then he could no longer capture his aura. This meant that the opponent's speed had reached an extreme, but how could such an extreme be possible for a boss-level audience? Exist. Boom. An ice shield appeared in front of Lyman. The moment Subai got close, his sixth sense warned him, but the ice shield collapsed instantly, and Subai's fist still hit Lyman's chest. Location. With this blow, Lyman found that he could not block it at all, because the opponent's speed was so terrifying, and the power of this blow was also really terrifying. When his body was knocked away, Lyman released streaks of frost aura from his fingers and shot them in front of him, hoping to force Subai not to take advantage of the situation to continue attacking. Sure enough, Subai continued to attack, but because of this, Subai endured Lyman's frost breath head-on, and his entire body turned into an ice sculpture in an instant, and then quickly shattered into ice fragments on the ground. But at the same time, pools of blood began to condense again, and Subai's figure appeared again. The laughter and growls became clearer and more arrogant than before, as if a person had discovered a very fun game and was getting happier and more immersed in it. After landing, Lyman glanced at the depression on his left chest, but what caught his attention was not his injuries, but the fact that his attack just now could not have broken Subai's body directly. The opponent's body was not that fragile, but in fact, it happened. Now Subai is obviously reorganizing his body again. Soon, Lyman understood that Subai was purely relying on his own quick recovery ability and directly ignored the defense part. He only pursued the improvement of speed and attack, and adopted the simplest and most direct method of fighting without leaving any room for error. It was a fatal play, but it had a very good effect. At least just now, Lyman believed that if Subai replicated the previous attack again, it would be difficult for him to predict and resist it in the first round. Then, Subai did not disappoint Lyman. As soon as his body recovered, he couldn't wait to disappear again. This attack method can no longer be called relying on the advantage to suppress you. In Lyman's eyes, it is obviously a way of playing a rogue unscrupulously. It is unreasonable and has no sense of beauty, but it really makes him unable to face it. Raymond stretched out his hands and formed an ice barrier around his body. However, as soon as the barrier was raised, a huge bombardment came from above, causing the barrier to shake and even begin to break. Lyman cursed, and a frost dragon totem flashed on his chest. The frost dragon roared upwards as if it had come to life, but Subai directly avoided it at this time. Remember's claw stabbed Raymond's arm. There was a crisp sound of crack /. Lyman's right arm was separated from its flesh and bones at this moment. At the same time, the terrifying corpse poison entered directly and began to crazily destroy Lyman's body functions. If Lyman didn't deal with it early, his body might only be abandoned. After Subai dodged the first blow with incredible speed, the frost dragon swept down again. Subai, who had just completed the attack, was no longer able to move quickly again, and his whole body was directly swallowed by the frost dragon. Drink. Lyman's body shook for a while. The frost dragon was still surrounding him, but Subai had disappeared, as if he had been completely wiped out by the terrifying power of the frost dragon just now. But there was no joy or relief in Lyman's heart. The guy who could even use self-destruction as a conventional means of combat could not die so simply. At this moment, all the bones of Lyman's right arm turned to ice, as if he had been equipped with a full ice prosthesis. First, it was easier for him to continue fighting. After all, he did not have Subai's abnormal resilience. Secondly, they used ice to suppress the corpse poison in the right arm bone to prevent it from spreading around. Roar! Roar! The giant frost dragon roared again and again, and hail began to fall above Wuhao district in Chengdu city. From time to time, screams and cries of ordinary people could be heard from all around. Although the hail would not cause too many casualties, there will always be some unlucky guys who die, which is enough to show how much psychological pressure Subai's 2 consecutive hits just brought to Lyman. In the air, a faint smell of blood began to spread out, and this smell of blood was like a murderous intention brewing, so obvious and unconcealed. At this moment, a hand suddenly stretched out and directly penetrated the body of the frost dragon. Subai reappeared like a ghost and started to attack the frost dragon directly. Disaster. Suffering. Hate. Curse. All kinds of negative aura poured from Subai's body into the soul of the frost dragon as if it was completely free. Subai was like a radioactive substance, polluting the frost dragon in the most terrifying way. The frost dragon, which had been arrogant just now, was wailing in pain. He wanted to attack Subai, but found that his will seemed to be controlled by Subai. Lyman didn't care about the life and death of the giant frost dragon. Even though the soul of this giant frost dragon was one of the weapons he most relied on, facing Subai's series of offensives, he finally realized clearly that he had just thought he was right, and even, it is a dispensable step back. In the eyes of the other party, it is more like a declaration of unrelenting war. Put away all luck, give up all impracticality. Even Lyman himself was also seriously injured by Subai's rapid offensive, which aroused the anger in his heart. He opened his palm and raised it upward. As Subai kept polluting the frost dragon, obscure spells kept appearing from Lyman's lips, and then, a ray of light broke through the dark clouds in the sky. Frost comes and covers the world. Forbidden, the judgment of the ice and snow goddess. In the void, a spear made of ice fell down, with a hint of judgment, and slowly fell into Lyman's hands. At this time, Lyman's aura also surged greatly, as if he was at this moment, his power has transcended its realm. The originally crystal clear frost dragon had turned into grey-brown at this time, and was forcibly compressed by Subai with unwillingness and anger. Finally, when Subai sensed the change in Lyman's aura, he stopped controlling the frost dragon. After further plundering, this giant frost dragon, whose consciousness was confused and its body had undergone huge changes, flew directly into the air and disappeared. It no longer belonged to Lyman, but at the same time, it was not tamed by Subai. Perhaps, its future ownership will be determined by the outcome of the current duel between these two humans. On behalf of the ice and snow goddess, I grant you endless ice. The gun of judgment was aimed at Subai, and all locks on Subai were completed in an instant, and Subai's figure quickly disappeared again. But this time, Lyman was not caught off guard by Subai again, because the gun of judgment automatically adjusted its direction. Puff. When Subai was about to launch an attack, his body trembled and he found that for some unknown reason, the gun of judgment had penetrated his chest and began to frantically kill everything about him. The destruction and annihilation caused by this moment, it is comparable to the consumption of one's own body being destroyed and reorganized 10 times. Do you think you are really immortal? Lyman, holding the gun of judgment, looked at Subai with anger and contempt. Today's duel, even if he won in the end, would still be a tragic victory, whether it was the contaminated frost dragon or the summoned the ice judgment spear comes at an extremely huge price. Subai's complete resistance and face-breaking behavior may amplify the contradictions in his actions this time. Of course, Lyman would not think that it was his actions and targeting that brought things to this point. He only thought that he had regressed and it was Subai who did not know how to maintain the overall situation. Subai, whose body was suffering tremendous torture, still had a crazy and wanton expression on his face even at this time. He knew no pain, no fatigue, no threats, and no fear of death. Even at this time, his signs of life were constantly declining. The ground weakened, but facing Lyman who couldn't wait to speak to him in a victor's tone. Subai expressed his attitude in the most direct way. I'm sorry, people under the Dao of Enlightenment probably don't have the right to kill me. Buzz. 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 A violent trembling sound came. Lyman was horrified to find that strange bloodlines appeared on Subai's chest, and these bloodlines actually penetrated into his ice judgment spear. The spear of judgment actually let out a trembling cry at this time. This. How can it be? You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 983. As the whip fell again and again, the injuries on Jixiang and Ruyi began to worsen. The originally black and smooth hair was now covered with mottled scars, and their auras began to fluctuate continuously and began to decline. Chico's is a high-level powerhouse, while Jixiang and Ruyi are just two low-level monsters. In addition, the audience's methods and magic weapons have great advantages when compared with other existences in the story world and the real world, making Chico's Co seem to be very relaxed and comfortable when dealing with these two black cats. If these two monsters had not cooperated closely and never gave him an excellent opportunity to severely damage KO, and Chico's was not willing to pay any price, this duel might have been long ago. It has ended. In fact, he felt that he was already invincible. All he needed to do was to make a gesture and show an attitude, that is, he could destroy this orphanage at any time. Next, we only need to look at the outcome of the negotiation between Layman and the Chinese named Subai. For Chico's and Pjanik, Zack and Macron who are resting and waiting in the distance, this matter is nothing more than it's just a formality, and the main method is nothing more than relying on the power to suppress others formed in a short period of time to achieve the goal at the minimum cost. They have no intention of arousing the anger of the entire Eastern Circle by acting recklessly in the East. It is said that there are already two big-shot listeners in the East, while no one in the West has advanced to enlightenment, and they are already weak in terms of peak combat power. In other aspects, the background of the Eastern audience at all levels is not inferior to that of the West, so they will come in with great fanfare and cause trouble unscrupulously unless their brains are flooded. Haha, Chico's looks like he wants to take those two black cats back as his pets after injuring their flesh and soul. Zack lit a cigar for himself and said with a smile while thinking about the taste of the cigar. Contact Layman and see what the result is. Pjanik didn't seem to be very satisfied with the wasting of time behavior of just sitting around watching the show and doing nothing, but reason told him that the current situation is already considered a waste of time. It's very good, there is no need to add extraneous details. This is the East, not the Americas or Africa where the audience base is pitifully small. Wait a minute, that llama's breath is boiling. Macron, who was still a little drunk just now, suddenly became sober and alert at this time. It seemed that he was about to advance. Chico's was a little involved by the two cats. Energy, coupled with the previously arranged barrier, may no longer be able to continue to trap the llama who has advanced. I'll go down and take a look. You continue to wait here. If that guy named Subai comes back, just stop him in advance. Marklon's strong body came towards here. He likes to drink, but he will never drink to get in trouble. Furthermore, watching Chico sucking the cat, his hands felt a little itchy watching from the side. Coincidentally, according to the information Lyman shared before, the llama also took the route of physical strengthening, which was just suitable for him to practice his skills. Suner felt that he was sometimes hot and sometimes cold in the barrier. This was not the effect of the barrier but what was happening to the llama who had just been sitting cross-legged next to him. A black figure appeared on the right side of the Buddha, and at the same time, a golden figure appeared on the left side of the Buddha. One Buddha and one demon. Harmonious coexistence. Finally, the Buddha opened his eyes, and the Buddha and the devil began to merge with each other again. At this time, the Buddha's aura was naturally promoted to the intermediate level. At this time, the Buddha no longer had the time and energy to consolidate his realm. Now, he needs to cut through the mess quickly, and at the same time, he is also a little impatient. Get up. The barrier beside him made a huge roar at this time, and as Buddha's hatchet fell, the barrier finally collapsed. Stay away, this is not a battle you can join, Foy said to Suner. Suner didn't say anything. She didn't continue to show off her strength at this time, but started to retreat obediently. She knew that Buddha was right, this was already a duel that she was not qualified to join. Buddha first looked at Chico's, who was in a stalemate with Ji Xiangruyi, and then turned his head and looked at Macron, who was walking towards him. "I'm here to spar with you." Macron twisted his neck and made a series of brittle joints. At the same time, the skin on his right arm burst open, revealing bone spurs burning with black flames. "Actually, you can just sit back and watch. I'm sorry, even if you change another thing, I might not be so determined, but in this matter, I feel that I have no room to retreat." Buddha smiled slightly. "If I were you, I would choose go all out to deal with us at this time, otherwise, you will regret it. We don't seem to need you to teach us how to do things." Macron licked his lips, and his body swelled slightly. "Then you have to be mentally prepared to all fall here. Subai hasn't come back yet, but Lord Buddha has already guessed Subai's choice in his heart. This time, because it concerns the safety of the little guy, and by extension Lord Buddha's own dignity, this time he agrees with Subai's choice, even if he doesn't. We have never contacted each other or communicated with each other, but we have been together for so many years, and we still have some tacit understanding. It's a big no-no to do things timidly and hesitantly." The Buddha held his hatchet horizontally, his breath solid, and he was ready. "Then I'll wait and see." Macron rushed over directly and threw the bone spur on his right arm at Buddha. Clang! Buddha's hatchet held the opponent's bone spur for a moment, a harsh friction sound was heard, and a huge crack appeared on the ground where the two were in a stalemate. Macron's bone spurs began to grow crazily, forming a semi-encircling area that enveloped Buddha. Buddha drew his knife, his left eye flashed with golden light, and his right eye suddenly appeared black. For a moment, surging demonic flames soared into the sky, hitting the bone spurs coming from all around. Then, the light of Buddha's light on the hatchet rose sharply, non-stop. Fighting back and forth. Macron's bone spurs wanted to directly suppress the Buddha and form a balance that was not a barrier but better than a barrier, but he soon discovered that the Lama in front of him had amazing perseverance, and with his two kinds of Buddha and demon the cyclic use of opposing attribute powers actually blocked his own offensive. "I underestimated you." Macron opened his mouth, and a crystal clear finger bone protruded from his mouth, and then extended out like a bone snake. This was the one Macron swallowed by chance in the past. The corpse of a big shot listener. That big shot fell into the real world, which is equivalent to achieving him in disguise. Puff. Buddha wanted to use a hatchet to block the white bones, but found that his wrist was shaken, the hatchet was knocked off, and the white bones directly pierced into his chest, and began to keep contact with the bones in his body. Collision and fusion. For a while, dense bones and teeth began to appear on Buddha's body, as if the white bones piercing his body were using him as soil to develop and grow again. There was a gloomy smile on Macron's lips. Although Lyman and everyone had a consensus that this time he needed to be as low-key as possible, but if he could take this opportunity to get a new skeleton puppet, this big gift package, it is impossible for him to be unwilling to accept it. As for the punishment, as long as he and others get the thing and trigger it, he believes that the broadcast will change the listener destruction plan and reopen the internet. This guy Macron, he is using all of us to share the cause and effect with him. Zack squeezed the cigar in his hand, his expression was not very good, of course he could understand what Macron wanted to do. Let him go for now. Doesn't Chico's also want those two monsters? Janik seemed very calm. If we can't get that thing, we will all die anyway, and if we get it only with that thing can we have a real chance to survive? It's all a carnival with no retreat anyway, so it doesn't matter. Listeners in the East probably haven't generally gotten the news here yet. At least in the short term, the situation will still be under our control. However, when retreating, it is best to use the formation teleportation method as originally planned to evacuate. Are you scared too? Zack looked at Janik and asked. Afraid, of course, we are exploring in a wolf's den, Janik joked. Buddha let out a roar. He could feel that his body was being occupied by magpie nests and doves, but he would never allow this to happen. The next moment, Buddha made his hands clasp together, and the tantric dharma words appeared. Immediately afterwards, Buddha, the densely packed bones and teeth on his body began to change into new colors. Macron's eyes narrowed, and then he appeared directly in front of Buddha. He punched out one hand and directly penetrated Buddha's body. He hung Buddha up like a piece of toothpick meat and said in a deep voice, "You want to sacrifice yourself, you used your life to summon the soul of the fallen boss, you are so hard-working, this forces me to completely annihilate your consciousness. This time, you all will die." Buddha's spellcasting was interrupted, and the bones and teeth on his body began to grow again, but there was still a smile on the corners of Buddha's mouth, as if it was not himself who was struggling to death, but the person in front of me. "I don't know where you get such confidence." Before Macron finished speaking, the roar of a speaker suddenly came from the distant hilltop, and then, a sonorous and exciting martial arts song rang out. Macron turned his head and saw a fat man with a big speaker on his shoulder on the hill not far away, looking down with a gloomy look. "Ask if this mountain is the highest in the world. Hey, fatty. Or there may be another place higher than the sky. Hey, fatty. There are mountains higher than this mountain in the world. Hey, fatty." Accompanied by the BGM of this classic martial arts song Hello in the World, the fat man who went down to the river to explore Zhangzian Zong's treasure came back. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 984. As a man who brings his own BGM to the stage, Fatty's self-confidence can be said to be at an all-time high now. Generally speaking, the man whose companions are in the most critical moment and suddenly plays the exciting BGM at the last moment is the real protagonist, at least, that's what Fatty thinks. "Zach, help me stop him." Macron directly shouted that if he was given more time, the llama in front of him could be completely controlled by him, and then he could control it to integrate into his body for improvement and supplementation. He was not willing to be interrupted or give up at this time. If at the beginning, everyone still had the idea of completing the goal as low-key as possible, then now, it is actually far away from the original intention at the beginning. Far away in Chengdu, Lyman was facing Subai, who was not willing to negotiate or negotiate at all. And now, the resolute obstruction of the two elementary monsters and the llama's refusal to retreat made what was originally a simple matter for them extremely complicated. "Fat man, they want to touch Su Yuxuan," Buddha shouted to the fat man while resisting the crazy growth of bones in his body. When the fat man heard this, his expression became even more gloomy. Damn it, at first he thought it was Lord Buddha's enemies who came to visit him, but he didn't expect it was for this. Fatty didn't continue to think about what the other party was doing to Subai by touching the little guy. Fatty didn't even know the functions that the Qin general's armor could trigger, but since the other party dared to touch the little guy, it was enough to suppress the anger in Fatty's heart. Everything was stirred up. Among the four people, Subai naturally has the closest relationship with the little guy, but the second person is actually the fat man who stole the little guy in the story world to complete the task. However, later on, it was the fat man who often stole the little guy at Lao Fang's house, taking the little one out to play, buy toys, and cook the food himself. Correspondingly, Subai didn't spend as much time with the child at home as the fat man did. However, just when Fatty was about to enter the battle group, a figure appeared behind him. He was dressed in exaggerated attire similar to that of a circus clown, holding a cigar in his mouth, giving a condescending warning. "Road. We don't want to complicate this, so please don't be impulsive." Zach blew out a smoke ring and shouted to his two partners below. "Don't forget why we came here this time." This was a warning, because the appearance of the fat man meant that the Eastern audience circle had already had a reaction because of what happened here. Even Zach didn't know if there would be other high-level Eastern listeners coming after this. Things are developing in an uncontrollable direction. However, Chico's whip instantly turned into a purple python, directly binding Jixiang and Ruyi with their snake bodies. No matter how hard Jixiang and Ruyi struggled, they still could not break free from the shackles of the big snake. Chico's shrugged and signaled that he had solved the problem. He needed these two monsters. After all, monsters with advanced audience capabilities are really hard to find. Even in the story world, even if you finally tame them and want to know all the monsters, bringing out the entire story depends on probability and luck. After all, entering and exiting the story world is subject to broadcast censorship. For example, the monk once brought out a fox demon in the story world, but it turned into an ordinary fox after returning to the real world. This is also the purpose of broadcasting for balance, otherwise the audience may not be able to learn from the story world. It will bring you a group of demons or Buddhas and Bodhisattvas back to the real world. Chico's can be regarded as taking an eccentric path to strengthening the sword. On the one hand, it is the cultivation of formations, and on the other hand, it is the fusion of monsters and beasts. Therefore, the more high-level monsters the better for him. The veins on Macron's arms were exposed, and strange runes appeared on his body. He was using secret methods to control the process of controlling Buddha's body at this time, and the bones and teeth on Buddha's body were blooming like flowers at this time. Stand up. Obviously, after the other party accelerated this process, Buddha's resistance was weakened a lot. Zok's face was a little ugly, but there was nothing he could do about it. The listeners were all selfish, and no one was willing to give up easy to get benefits. Especially under the premise that the broadcast might change its strategy again in the near future, there was quite a feeling of amnesty. The feeling of being as arrogant as you can be in the world the day before. A mahogany sword appeared in the fat man's hand, and with a flick of his hand, it swept directly towards Zack beside him. Zack frowned. Until now, he was a little surprised by the unity and backbone shown by the Eastern audience. Neither the Lama nor the fat man in front of him were as high as them, but they were never ambiguous when it was time to take action. There is not even room for negotiation. Zack has begun to worry about the final development of this matter. He can only hope that Lyman will come up with a result soon. Even if the Chinese named Subai is not willing to sacrifice for the child, as long as he is forced to hand over the thing, everyone was satisfied when they came out. Clang. Fatty's mahogany sword was deflected by Zack with his fingertips. Although sparks were flying for a moment, Zack was still very calm. After all, Fatty was only at the beginning of the peak level and was 2 realms behind Zack. Janek, contact Layman and ask him what happened over there. Zack yelled behind him, and then began to deal with the fat man seriously. No matter what, the situation here must be completely stabilized. But Fatty obviously came prepared. In fact, the aura fluctuations caused by Buddha's previous advancement were very obvious. Maishan City is not very far from the orphanage, so Fatty could naturally sense it. Besides, who was in a hurry when Buddha advanced? Anyone who is not stupid can guess that Buddha's advancement is forced. It feels more like facing some kind of crisis and having to advance to increase the chips in the battle. Chen Guang, I don't want Fatty Stone Man anymore, help me beat them. Damn it, if you dare to steal Fatty's godson, Fatty will fight for it. I'm just waiting for your words. Suddenly a stone man appeared in the sky. The stone man was 2 people tall. It was not very towering. It was even much smaller than ordinary statues of great men. However, the violent aura exuding from this stone man made people have to go. Pay attention to. Chen Guang stretched out his hand to urge the stone man to hit Zack. Zack had to take 2 steps back and stretched out with one hand, trying to push the stone man away, but in the end he had to give up and stepped back one after another. Some distance. Boom. The stone man smashed a huge hole in the ground, flew up again, and smashed it over again. It seemed that he could eat all over the world with one move. Zack was forced to retreat continuously. This stone man was too weird. Several times he tried to block or resist the stone man, but a special power appeared on the stone man, which forced him to be more cautious. Of course, Chen Guang on the other side was very happy. He and Fatty had spent a lot of effort to get the stone man out of the river bottom, but now with the help of the stone man, he could actually defeat the high-level strong men. It's really great. The fat man rushed directly to the Buddha. At the same time, the fat man also brought a cloud, but this cloud was not very beautiful. Draw thunder. Macron wanted to stop Fatty, but Buddha started to counter-attack at this time, forcing Macron to temporarily be unable to free his hands, and Fatty also got a chance to get close, and a purple talisman was directly attached to Buddha's head. Superior. This is the thunder talisman. In an instant, a purple thunder fell from the sky, and the talisman that the fat man attached to Buddha's body served as a mark for bombers to attack. Boom. The thunder penetrated Buddha's body, but Buddha was not directly injured because the bones and teeth in his body that tried to control him were the first to bear the damage. For a moment, wisps of white smoke emitted from Buddha's body, dispersed after being destroyed. At that moment, Buddha, who had difficulty even moving, without hesitation reached out and pierced his chest, took out a bone and then smashed it to the ground. The hatchet struck directly, but this was a big boss after all. The bones of a top listener, after being refined by Macron, are naturally not that easy to break, but Buddha's hatchet can at least play a suppressive role in a short period of time. On the top of another mountain, the trapped Jixiang and Ruyi let out an extremely sharp roar. The hairs of the two cats stood on end, and Ruyi directly turned into a black smoke and flew out, then submerged in Jixiang's body. Jixiang and Ruyi were brought out from the place of enlightenment by Su Yuhang 20 years ago and Su Bai 20 years later respectively. No one knows how these two cats came from and what secrets they have. Maybe Su Yuhang and Su Fugui could know a little bit, but since one of them merged into the broadcast and the other disappeared into thin air, the truth would never be found. But at this moment, Jixiang and Ruyi showed their incredible scene. The fusion of the two cats is definitely not just as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. After the fusion, the eyes of the fused Jixiang cat released a strong aura of death. In the past, when Su Bai saw Jixiang for the first time, he saw the underworld and mountain-like corpses in Jixiang's eyes. But now, this scene turned into a barrier and enveloped it. Chico's whip cracked directly at this moment, and Jixiang also broke free from it. At the moment, Jixiang's aura was still at the low level, but was clearly at the peak of the middle level. Meow. A cat meow with deep hatred came from Su Bai's mouth, and then it licked its paws and looked at Chico's as if it were looking at a dead person. The originally one-sided situation was suddenly forcibly brought back to an incredible balance. Janik put down his phone over there. He couldn't contact Layman. It was very likely that something went wrong over there. But Janik is also a decisive person. In fact, he can become a high-level listener and even reach a high-level position. There will be no fools. Janik's figure came out of hiding and said simply, "Be serious, get rid of them, find out the whereabouts of that thing, and seize the time."